Checking out a beehive in a front yard here in Boise, Idaho. I'm Damon, the Global Gardener, theglobalgardener.com. Tons of other videos on fun things around the world, and today it's this groovy beehive in sort of downtown Boise, Idaho. If you've been to Boise, the Greenbelt is a fantastic space, but there is some really neat stuff in town here, and a very simple pollinator attraction zone. You can see the hummingbird feeder, and I don't know if you can hear the active hive. I don't want to get too close, but there are many happy bees. I've seen them around the neighborhood. I've done some landscaping nearby, and it's a fairly dry climate here in Boise, but like you can see the native sagebrush growing and some of it not growing so well, but that's a good indicator of how dry it is. Sage can take some, this is the native sage too, it can take some water, but it certainly prefers the dry summers here. And what good things are there to say about pollinators and the local beehive? Here's more sage. They get pretty large when they're not even mulched or anything. They actually clean up the mulch. That's pretty hardy. Xeriscape plants. Xeriscaping, with the X is the term for super dry plantings. So, and plants that can survive with basically no water. And the native plants are obviously the best things in wherever you are for low water landscape. Bees actually do need a little bit of water, and they have a little water tray out front to support them. I don't know if they put sugar water in that, but we can go up closer and inspect perhaps without getting in the path of the bees. But you can see they actually have the little rocks in the watering trays are painted like bees, and just a lovely, loving home for the bees. The supers are painted with flowers. And so anyway, the rocks in the water trays are so that the bees can find access without like having to float on the water. They can go up to the edge. You can see the one that's just a Pyrex baking tray with a stick in it. So they can walk down that and just sort of lick away at the moisture. And of course, hummingbirds. You can see the red hummingbird feeder. You don't have to put the food dye in the feeder. They'll still be attracted to it. My mom in California had a backyard where she had like half a dozen different I'm trying to show you the street view here. Half a dozen different hummingbird feeders, and they just had sugar water in them, which isn't the best food for really anything because it's devoid of nutrients and minerals. But the hummingbird population grew because they had a ready source of fuel. They buzz around on sugar, they're sugar high constantly, and she had like 6 of them, and you could go out there and they were just this like airstrip field of just enjoyment, and they'd chase each other away, and there was little drama games, and you could get familiar with different ones that you'd see more often, hummingbirds. And so they pollinate a lot of different things, hummingbirds. There's also bats are amazing pollinators, so putting up bat boxes or habitat for bats, and all these things can be put in trees. Bats, birds, bees, and butterflies are the 4 B's of main pollination. There's various wasps and things that do a lot of pollinating. Here's another plant I wanted to point at, echinacea. See if we can zoom in on the echinacea. That's a good one here in Idaho and mountainous regions, and really anywhere. I've grown it in California quite successfully. and New York even. I've grown it out there too. I've landscaped in 10 different states, 6 of 9 different climates of the United States, and I'm still intrigued and learning after 35 plus years landscaping and a master's degree in agriculture. Still find things that are beautiful and interesting, and things I haven't seen before. There's always something new, always something to learn, and I always appreciate the different applications of, like how we saw bees in just a front yard. We're just walking down the street here and there happens to be bees. There's some places where people keep chickens just in their, and usually in their backyard, because people might mess with them in the front yard depending on the neighborhood. But chickens do a lot of work. They're maybe not pollinators, but they turn things into fertilizers. They'll do some weeding depending on where you put them and how you keep them. But so you can have bees, or you can have like a completely sterile lawn. A very high energy use environment, not just water in this dry climate. We saw the sage. Like, you really shouldn't have, I don't know how they allow such like high water use, high chemical use to keep it green, and then high petroleum use. Well, the fertilizers are often petroleum, but then the petroleum animals that graze this sort of environment, the mowers and the blowers and the edgers and the trucks that come around bringing all the petroleum equipment. So very sterile environment, especially keeping a monocropped like this with one item, a monocot, the grass. Very limited diversity. The pollinators, there's probably chemicals. The clopyralid is a chemical that they were finding it in compost, that they were using grass clippings and making compost at a municipal site in California, and found the clopyralid was in that, and it was killing a lot of things, pollinators. And so to keep a monoculture going, it takes chemicals to kill anything but the monocots and the grasses, and so limited diversity with high energy use equals non-sustainability, and really not that interesting. Like, the usefulness of the grass, like, nobody's out there playing sports. You don't see any dogs out there. The neighborhood dogs probably do their business there and are appreciative that there's a little space for that, but generally that's not, the usefulness is very limited with such high resource use. Here's another Xeriscape. Is got these semi-succulent type plants, and there's actually lavender in there too, which lavender can be high water use, but can also usually with mulch it can do quite well. Stopping here in the filtered shade because it's pretty hot out today. And then just this whole field of rocks, which is a different sort of monoculture. Like, it's barely a polyculture with the ground covers on the tree, but rocks get a lot of weeds. There's a few of them you can see in here. Grasses, and so if the grass does flower and seed, it's going to be carried over, and then this is going to become a weed patch. So the chemicals to keep this rock area a monoculture of rocks also requires chemical inputs. A lot of people put like weed fabric underneath there, or they call it weed barrier, things like this. But I've found that the weeds just really grow on top of it. It just gives them another avenue to grow in. And if it's the convolvulus, the morning glories, they just put roots underneath it and wind around until they can get up enough gumption to poke through the weed barrier, and then it's no longer barrierizing. It's now a effective weed patch. So here's a cherry tree in this median strip. Here's an interesting use, because here in Boise, the homeowners are responsible for the median strip, including watering it. And here's a cherry tree that's long past fruiting. It's August now, a very hot day in August, and so there's a cherry tree in the median strip that's just sort of out here for everybody to enjoy over time. This place also has lilac, catalpa, and a plum tree. And I don't see any fruit trees in their backyard, but that's always possible as well. Although it's nice to share. There's a few different fruit